You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the Unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're joined today by Delegate Danica Roem. She's going to be talking to us about the brand new Virginia Cold Case Database, which we are very excited about. Danica, thank you for joining us on Mind Over Murder today.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm grateful to be with you.
You sounded grateful just to get out of those long meetings you were in.
Just being on the road was really today. Transportation's always been my top issue. And anytime you're sitting down for an hour and 40-hour, 50-minute commute, you got enough expletives by the end of that to want to change a lot of things.
We were absolutely thrilled a couple of months back when we heard about the Cold Case Database because it is something that is very important to both of us. We'd like to start just by asking, what was the impetus for this Cold Case Database? What made you go, we need this and we need it now?
Sure. After I won my first election in 2017, I've now been elected to the House of Delegates 3 times. Delegate Marcus Simon basically dropped me a line and said, hey, in the way that a lot of veteran members will do when there are freshmen who are incoming into the House of Delegates to General Assembly, they'll say, hey, I know you've got a bunch of stuff you're working your own, but just to help you get you started, we've got a whole bunch of other bills that we've drafted that we're looking for patrons for. Do any of these sound like they would be interesting to you? And so he gave just basically like a whole option, a whole buffet of things that I could include along with what I was already introducing. And the only one I actually went for was the Cold Case Database. What I thought was really interesting with this is, number one, I'm a reporter before I'm a politician. I spent 10 and a half years as a newspaper reporter and basically vetting facts and reporting the news as it is instead of how other people want it to be. Because of my news experience, my news background, I am very pro-transparency and pro-people understanding how government works and public accountability to go along with that. At the same time, when you take my background in that, in terms of my background dealing with the Freedom of Information Act, my background just dealing with public records in general, in that I approach public records with the ethos of trying to make the most amount of information available to the most number of people whenever our tax dollars are what pay for these documents in the first place. Therefore, they should be accessible to the public. They are public documents. You would be amazed at how radical of a concept this is in the Virginia General Assembly.
Wow.
Oh my God, you're trying to make it easier for people to get information? What? We don't do that here. We have more than 170 FOIA exemptions so that our FOIA law looks like a giant block of Swiss cheese, except for that Swiss cheese is more malleable and more edible. And that's a problem because I don't like Swiss cheese unless it's melted. I have to look at this and say, what am I going to do here to actually start chipping away at this culture in Richmond where our default setting is making it harder for the public to find public documents. One of the big things that we deal with is especially in areas of law enforcement. That's a huge area right there where now former Delegate Chris Hurst, he got a bill passed a couple of years ago regarding criminal investigative files. The Republican-led House of Delegates turned it around this year, despite my protestations on the House floor, because their default setting, once again, is to restrict public documents from the public. My reporter brain cannot make amends with that at all. So anyways, with the Cold Case Database, Delegate Simon's predecessor had previously filed this bill, and the Republicans killed it years ago. And then I filed this bill in 2018. Unnoticed to me at the time, I was on something called the kill list. And the kill list means that when you're a freshman from a swing district or they just don't like it, I'm a freshman from a swing district in my 2018 brain, then they kill all your bills. And it doesn't matter what the merits are, they just kill them. The Cold Case Database was actually the only one of my bills that made it out of a committee that year. because it was a much more gentle death for them to send it to the Appropriations Committee, where they could just simply not act on it and not fund it. And so that bill, no one wanted to go on record opposing this thing. It was like, this is a really good idea. Let's kill it in a very soft manner so that we don't have to be on record for it, and the appropriators won't be held accountable for it, because we were only asking for $100,000 in order to do this, which, 2 years later, so fast forward 2 years later, now we have a Democratic majority in the House, Democratic majority in the Senate, and Democratic governor. So we got a Democratic trifecta, and I've brought the bill back, and now the bill's doing really well. But at the same time, the Senate wasn't going to allow it to pass until they decided whether we're going to include the budget amendment for it. And so it got caught up very late in session in this very high stakes game. I mean, $100,000 again, it's for a full-time employee to set up and manage the system. It's not that much by General Assembly standards. In fact, one of the more senior Republicans told me in private, he goes, $100,000? Oh, hell, that's budget dust. So I thought that was a very fascinating look inside. And he also said that one of the senior appropriators could quote, he could find that in his couch.
Searching around for quarters.
Yeah, boy, that was a kind of funny moment. I will say the delegate who said it is very funny. But despite being a member of the other side, I actually get along with a lot of members. And having a sense of humor is definitely a good way to do it. So anyway, though, all that said, I was really just like biting my nails toward the end of session. And Delegate Simon, I go up to whine to him about it. And he's just, you should prepare for your bill to die. I was like, no, this is a good bill. I don't need that much money for it. Come on. Look, we're funding things worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We can do $100,000 to solve murder. Come on. And the whole point of having a cold case database is to basically have a public front-facing system that shows every unsolved murder, every unsolved missing persons case, and every unsolved unidentified persons case in the Commonwealth. And so we finally got it out. They decided the Senate agreed to fund it so I could reject the clause and whatever, and we got this thing funded. As we passed the bill, COVID hit. And so we put a freeze on all new spending. And so it took 2 years to get this thing up and running. And we had Virginia State Police really use a lot of existing precedent from other states like Connecticut and Florida and some others that already have these cold case databases. And so now that we've got this thing launched up and ready, so right from the get-go, I think we had 37 or so cases or 39 cases that were actually active on the cold case database to start with. And then, so I started doing my media tour on this. Been trying to tell people on this, like the public at large, look, regardless of your politics on this, I already got the W. Okay, all right, we passed my bill. That goes into my win column. If I passed 32 bills, great. At this point, I am doing these interviews. I'm talking to people like you, and I'm talking to reporters at large right now, because the only way the cold case database works is if the public is engaged with it. That means the public needs to know about it, the public needs to use it, and the public needs to click the buttons where it actually says, hey, I have a tip about a case. And yet we just found out from the Roanoke Times just a couple of weeks ago, hey, someone used the cold case database for a tip that's created a new lead for an unsolved homicide. There you go. That's the whole point. That is the entire reason that we put this together in the first place, so that the public could, number one, no matter where they are, whether they're in Accomack or Abington or Arlington or anywhere in between, you could see right there, here are the unsolved murders, unsolved missing persons cases, and unsolved unidentified persons cases throughout the whole Commonwealth. Hell, you could be around the world, and as long as Virginia state websites work in your country or wherever you are, that you'll be able to view it, and it'll be front facing. And then hopefully, if you're someone and you look at some of these cases and you're like, hey, that's a name I recognize, I have a photo of this person, but there is no photo on the Virginia State Police website, then you can be the person who submits that tip. Well, because that's going to get more people to interact with it.
That's one of the questions we wanted to ask. We're obviously very concerned about unsolved murders in Virginia. We started this Mind Over Murder podcast because of specific unsolved murders, the Colonial Parkway murders in Virginia. So how do we get additional information? For instance, we do have photographs of some of the people that are currently on the database. How does a person contact the administrator for the new database?
What you'll see when you interact with it is coldcase.vsp.virginia.gov. Again, coldcase, all one word, .vsp, which stands for Virginia State Police, .virginia.gov. When you go through the cold case database, you'll see the little buttons there where you can submit a tip and you can send it right over, and it is monitored every day. And so you'll actually have a good chance of doing that. And one of the big hopes that we have in establishing this, right now, the version that is up there is version 1.0. This is going to evolve as Virginia State Police begins working with local law enforcement and local Commonwealth attorneys and local whoever else it is. So that right now the cases that are up there are basically cases that come under Virginia State Police jurisdiction, more or less. And here we're in Western Prince William County. We've got a case from the 70s of an unsolved murder from Conway Robinson Memorial State Park, which is an area right between Gainesville and Manassas, right next to the Manassas National Battlefield. Then we also have one from right before I was born, actually in the city of Manassas, of the only unsolved murder of a Virginia State trooper in Virginia history. Johnny Bowman's case.
Johnny Bowman, right.
Johnny Bowman, yeah.
Exactly. And that happened, and he was killed in his home. This is one of the things I am really hopeful for here is that if you are a cops and crime editor or cops and courts editor of a newspaper or news organization of some sort, what I would be doing at this is I would look at the cold case database and I'd be like, hey, every week, come here, rookie reporter. I want a new story on this case. Yeah. I want a new story on this one. I want to highlight another case every week that we go to publication and stuff, because unsolved murders, unsolved missing persons cases, unidentified persons cases, those are still news. That's still relevant because it happened so many years or decades ago. And in this case, a cold case has to be more than 5 years. What we're looking at here is that these are people whose killers were never brought to justice, families or friends that are still looking for answers, and people who have disappeared, and maybe someone somewhere is still holding out hope for them. In their mind, yeah, that's still news every single day. News is supposed to be new. I understand that, but that doesn't mean you can't follow up on what has happened, because people move around. It's transient, state, especially here in Northern Virginia. So we want to encourage people, number one, to please interact with the cold case database, even just one time. Just look at it one time all the way through, click each one. Just see if you heard or remember something, because you never know if the thing that you know is the thing that can just lead to a clue, just to get people thinking differently, and then that can lead to a resolution.
Absolutely. So you said that this is version 1.1 of the database. How often are you thinking the database is going to be updated? What are you looking at in terms of moving it forward?
Basically, the cold case database updates at this point, this will come from Virginia State Police, so as opposed from the legislature. They have the tools what they need to do at this point to upload it. And keep in mind, the state code on this only says that they've got to put up their cases, they got to work with local law enforcement to put up cases. If they want to work with federal organizations, they want to work with the FBI, for example, they're certainly entitled to do. They're not prohibited from doing that. And I would be happy to facilitate any conversations that we need so that every law enforcement agency that's working in Virginia actually is able to work with them, whether that includes FBI, of course. I don't know if that you would have a CIA case on there per se, but still, I don't mind having too many chefs in the kitchen in this particular case, because if all those chefs in the kitchen are working to resolve a murder, then maybe someone somewhere knows something that one of them knows how to figure out, hey, this is what we're going to do to bring someone to justice.
How do we convince local law enforcement? We know there's a lot of cities and towns across Virginia that have unsolved cases. Some of them are cases we're very familiar with. How do we get local law enforcement to participate? Is it an arm-twisting thing, or is it a Virginia State Police thing?
So first, the Virginia State Police, it's their impetus to be able to contact local law enforcement agencies in the first place, though we would certainly suggest from my office's standpoint that our 133 localities actually take initiative upon themselves to reach out to Virginia State Police and say, hey, here are some cases that we have, here are some files that we have. We'd love to have some help. Number two, check your ego. It is a lot worse for you to have a case that goes unsolved in perpetuity than it is for you to have one where the public knows about it because it's on this website. Because here's the thing, just because it's not on the website doesn't mean that you ever did the job. If you're just trying to be like, oh, we don't want to bring any extra attention to the fact that we have this unsolved case, then you need to leave your job and we need to find someone else who's actually going to do your job in terms of solving crimes That's the whole point. And part of solving crimes and solving unidentified persons and missing persons, that means that we have to have the public engaged inherently. And so I would suggest on this of everyone needs to suck up their egos, put this stuff online, and then, hey, you could become hero of the day for using it too. If I need to play to your own incentive on this, because you did the right thing, maybe your case gets solved. And maybe because you have a lot more public attention, you have more public awareness, and you have more public awareness, then like in the Roanoke case, we get tips that come in. That's a big deal. Just use it as a point of pride. Hey, look, we have had decades worth of struggle dealing with this. Let's try it again. We're going to give this thing fresh eyes. I promise you, the people who you actually represent in your area, who you're supposed to be serving in the first place, they're going to look at that with a lot more favor than they're going to look at people trying to obfuscate cases just because they're old and cold.
It's so wonderful to hear you say this. What was Virginia State Police's initial reaction when you first put this idea forward? Obviously,
so Virginia State Police never had an objection to it as long as we provided the funding. So as long as the Virginia General Assembly allocated the money and Virginia State Police didn't have to reallocate existing resources to it, then they were happy to do it. More or less, they were neutral on it. They were like, hey, if you give us the money, sure, yeah, we'll do it. I've been telling people ever since, if we solve one case, we bring one case closed because of this, the whole investment's worth it. Whole investment is entirely worth it. And by the way, on top of that, until we get to that first case, even though it looks like we've actually got a pretty good shot at that now, what is the problem of investing in transparency? My God, we do so much in Virginia to keep our constituents away from information. Maybe, just maybe every now and then, our state can take the initiative to put information out there in a front public-facing manner in the first place. I know it's a noble concept. I know that I am speaking in this like dream world and dreamscape of, oh my God, you mean the public has information? Yes, that is in fact possible. And thus the precedent that we've established with the cold case database is, hey, we can be a little bit more proactive about bringing out the most amount of information for the most number of people so that it's more accessible and that government is accessible to people. By the way, I'm in my third term in office now. I'm supposed to be really jaded on this. Instead, I just get really pissed off when my constituents can't get what they need. And that just makes me double down. Again, I spent 10 and a half years in newsrooms. I will always think like a reporter. And a reporter is going to try to break down those barriers for information.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Looking beyond the database, like what are some other measures that you'd like to see put in place to help solve cold cases around the Commonwealth beyond the database, which is a great idea in and of itself?
Sure. Let's just focus on the transparency part on this. It's not that you necessarily need more resource on it in terms of more money. The biggest thing that we need right now is every media outlet, hell, you could have your interested local blogger for all I care. We need people who will put a spotlight on this, just like a good podcast could, where people who are really interested in this sort of stuff are tuning in the first place. We need eyes on the page. We need 8.3 million people to be aware that this exists in the first place. That's really what we need more than anything right now to help solve these cold cases, is the public being invested enough to want to look at what is unsolved right now. A big part of that is actually subscribing to your local newspaper, by the way. Please do that. I subscribe to mine. And actually reading the news, not misinformation, not disinformation, not things that other people want to tell you because they're trying to drive a political narrative of some sort, but actual journalism that has gone through a neutral, independent, third-party vetted system here where you've actually had facts that are verified and gone through an editorial process for the sake of pursuing journalistic mission. If you do that, then you're going to encounter more stories like this where you're just going to have the facts neutrally presented to you. And hopefully you can learn from those facts and go, hey, wait a minute, I've got something that's missing here. And even if you don't, maybe someone who is interested in something with this, pass that link on. I've never been one for, my lungs don't like the smell of pot, but there's that saying, take a hit and pass to the left. That's the cold case database right now. View it, pass it on. View it, pass it on. I want everyone to just do that. Pass the person to your left, pass the person to your right. I don't care. Take a look at the database. We need you to do that. And again, it's like coldcase.vsp.virginia.gov.
Were you surprised by the glowing coverage that you got? And I know you wore the journalist hat for a number of years, 10 and a half years. The coverage that the database has gotten so far has been so incredibly positive. Were you surprised that your fellow reporters jumped on it in the way that they did?
No, not at all, because we did the outreach to those organizations, and some of them reached out on their own behalf, which was nice. No, I'm a reporter. I know how to get media attention. Jesus Christ, you don't become transgender head, metalhead reporter, Eugene, stepmom vegetarian, and not know how to talk to reporters.
I forgot about the metalhead thing in your background.
Play all day, Bill.
So as victims advocates on my part and as family members of crime victims on Bill's part, what can we do to further this? And it's not just, we want to do more than just, we have this awesome podcast and we're passing along this information. What can we do boots on the ground to help you guys with this database?
Well, number one, if you have an email list, if you could include this out into your email list where you put the link out and you actually do that front facing, that would be great. If you have this link on just your homepage, any social media handles that you have, and encourage people, check out our interview with Delegate Danica Roem talking about the cold case database, which you can view right here at this link at coldcase.vsp.virginia.gov, which is based on her bill from 2020, HB 1024, in order to get this thing established in the first place. So if people want to interact, if people want to view this or do anything, the more we can just let them know that it exists, that's the biggest one that we can have right now. And also, by the way, one of the other things that you can do locally, you can go up to your local law enforcement agency, if you were comfortable talking with them in the first place, and ask, have you reached out to Virginia State Police to get any of your cold cases included on this database? What I'm going to also do for y'all here is I am going to drop the actual Code of Virginia itself, the bill that we passed, into our little Zoom chat here. So you can see exactly what it is that the bill says and what it authorizes Virginia State Police to do in the first place.
Nice. That is very helpful.
You're welcome.
Is there an expiration date to this, or
No.
does this require additional funding down the road?
No, we got to keep that person employed. So we got to pay a salary beyond that. It's just going to be an integrated part of the Virginia State Police, just like they hire for everything else. You should have someone who's monitoring cold cases. That seems important because they're still unsolved. Therefore, that means someone hasn't gotten all the information that they need yet, which means that this is a live case, and we have dozens of them across the Commonwealth just from what VSP has, let alone what our localities have. Therefore, this person should stay very busy for a very long time. That is the goal.
And is the staff person embedded with the VSP? Do they work for the Virginia State Police?
Yes, they do.
Do you feel like this can be a model for other states? I know you mentioned a handful of states, Danica, that are doing this around the country. I'm not aware that we're anywhere close to 50 states.
No, we're not at 50 states by any means, but at the same time, yes, because we built on precedent for this and we looked at what other states are doing and tried to make our best version of it. Then other states can look at what Virginia's doing now and say, hey, what can we do to make it even? That would be totally fine with me. Just we've passed, of my 32 bills we've signed into law since I've been in office in my 3 terms, 10 of them feed hungry kids. I have put the actual text of each of those bills on my social media pages before, and I told other legislators in other states, steal my bill, play like this, do this exact thing. The thing that I need, like when I'm trying to put together bills, especially when I'm trying to work on a precedent, is what is in the code of whatever other state. Get me as close to the legalese as possible. I'll send it to the Division of Legislative Services. Those attorneys will then put it into the legalese of Virginia. And then, hey, we've got ourselves a bill. That's like the reason that I sent you all the PDF for this and that I've been sharing it is yes, I want to solve our unsolved homicides, missing person cases, and identified person cases in Virginia. And in other states, for what is a relatively low cost, you can have this bill of your own. You go establish it. Other states, you don't even necessarily have to have a bill for it. Just go and instruct your state police to go and set this up in the first place. And if they take the initiative, great. Or you can give them extra money for it. Whatever it is, just do the damn thing because it's helpful and transparency is a good thing. That's the other thing. It's constituent service. You should know what unsolved murders are in your state or your commonwealth. You absolutely should.
When we talk on Mind Over Murder about the fact that there's 250,000 cold case homicides across the United States, people are floored. They actually don't believe us sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and keep in mind, we still have another whole number that have been unsolved for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so as those hit that 5-year mark, they're going to get added to this cold case database as well. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Just because they're not at the 5-year mark doesn't mean that we've suddenly run out of unsolved murders or something.
Yeah.
Oh, there'll be more coming for sure.
And unfortunately, as we all know, terrible things happen every single week. So there will always be new cases and new unsolveds to move forward. Was the 5-year criteria, was that just something that you felt was appropriate?
That was based on existing precedent.
We wanted to talk to you about something which I think will resonate with you, which is we were just exploring a case of a young woman named Sage Smith, who's a trans murder victim. One of the areas, and Charlottesville Police Department even admitted this, they presented Sage in her previous life known as Dashad in a way that was very confusing. In other words, for someone that would be looking for information about Sage, who's still missing, and we think she'll be at 10 years this fall, we think anyone that would be looking for Sage or information about Sage should be looking for a young woman with this kind of appearance, not Dashad as she was known in her previous life.
So in trans world, we refer to that as dead naming someone.
Yes, we're familiar.
Yeah, and it's wildly disrespectful to do that in the first place. And then the reason for that is, look, when we're born, we don't have a say in what our name is. Someone else picks that for us. And at the same time, when we come into who we are and we learn who we are, and we go, hey, this is who I am, which is I only changed 2 letters of my name. I kept the other 17 characters between my first, middle, and last name. At the same time, my legal name of Danica is a infinitely more accurate representation of who I am and how I feel about myself, not to mention it's my literal name. So identifying me by anything other than that is, well, wrong. In other trans people's cases, however, because maybe you haven't gone to go through the whole court process and all the other sort of stuff with this, Virginia State Police and where your local law enforcement agents will have to understand in terms of how they interact with and how they work on cases involving trans people. Number one, trans people exist. Let's just start with that very basic notion, because we have too many people in law enforcement, not to mention other people who simply will not treat trans people as if being trans is a thing. They will simply dead name us. They will misgender us. When you do, that means all the social contacts, all the people who actually know who we are, if you're actually supposedly even trying to solve our case in the first place, you're not going to get good information if you're identifying someone who other people don't recognize as who they are. So that's just basic reality. Number 2 on this, we've had a lot of different standards upgrades and other things over the years now where in Virginia, law enforcement's become a lot more aware that not only do we exist, but at the same time, we have unsolved homicides of Black trans women in particular, especially whether it's from Richmond to Lynchburg to areas in between, where when we passed my resolution H-Day 85 in 2020, that marks November 20th of every year as Transgender Day of Remembrance in Virginia. And we actually listed the women who were murdered in there. To refer to them by anything other than the name we put in there would be to not only disrespect that person, but to factually get something wrong to actually make it harder to solve that crime in the first place.
Exactly.
And so the last thing I want to mention here is that Black trans women specifically, trans women of color more broadly, face disproportionate violence compared to almost any other demographic group anywhere in the United States. And in fact, when you start going around the world, you can see different countries where homicide statistics are staggering. here in the United States, yes, white trans women also do get killed. Trans men get killed, for that matter, by the way. And so it's not that people who look like me don't face violence. It's that statistically speaking, the overwhelming number of homicides that are committed against trans people happen to trans women of color, and specifically to Black trans women, with Latinas being second in that regard, just year in and year out. And Virginia is no different from other states in this regard. So it is very important that our documents and the public information that is out there accurately reflects who these folks are, which is that they're trans, which means that they have, if they're trans feminine and they chose their name, to use that name. It's an accurate reflection of who they are. This should be basic, but unfortunately here, because we've seen such a resurgence, not a rise necessarily, but a resurgence of bigotry that we've dealt with in years past, that in and of itself is a form of misinformation and disinformation, which makes it harder for people to solve a case, not to mention to actually have the incentive that you need to take the initiative in order to solve a case, because people won't necessarily get involved with it. Therefore, what I'm hoping here is that our cold case database, especially since I'm the one who put in the bill for this and we'll be checking up on this, well, pretty much often, we'll just go with that, is going to be entirely respectful of trans identities. And we're going to make sure that we are, as we're putting these cases online, that we're not going to disrespect the community that these people are coming from.
Thank you. It's very well said. I think in addition to the respect issue and the accuracy issue, it's just good, solid police work to put an accurate description of an individual and say, this person presents as such and such a name and should be referred to, described, and with current photography, et cetera, in a way that just would increase the chances that someone might know something, as opposed to something that's an antiquated, as you said, dead name.
And I understand that when you're dealing with law, when you're dealing with all this other sort of stuff, that having a person's legal name being established, I understand why that could be a default setting for people, and that, oh, it's important for us to recognize this based on social security numbers linked up to this person, and we're looking for transactions, or we're looking for credit card information, whatever. I get that. At the same time, make sure at the very least, before you're publishing that information about that person's dead name, that you're talking to the people who actually knew who that person most likely she is in the first place. And you're saying, this is what we're thinking about doing with this, blah, blah, blah. Let me get your input because you're someone from the community. I'm not someone who's going to be so rigid as to say that there couldn't be special circumstances and stuff like that. I understand that. And sometimes we have to take cases individually on a case-by-case basis with this. I get it. And because we're trying to solve murders here and missing persons and unidentified persons cases here. That said, you're dealing with a group of people who are inherently more traumatized to begin with just by societal interaction. And quite frankly, the fact that murders of trans women are so lowly prioritized and that people just don't care about it in so many cases. I don't know what, let me just put it this way. Above all, can either of you all name any capital murder execution that has happened from the state because the victim was a trans person?
Not a one.
No. And you all are people who are very interested in this sort of stuff. Trans people getting killed matters less in society than cis people getting killed by and large. That has been how it has been for a very long time. And it took until you had a horrific slaying of a 19-year-old in Mississippi, actually, to even get hate crime laws established at the federal level to include gender identity. And that was tied to a sexual orientation case as well out of Texas that was just utterly gruesome. You've had you look at what happened with Guanajuato in 2002 in California, for example. You look at as a young Latina trans woman and just the brutal murder that she endured. Before that, of course, there was even as a cisgender gay man in Matthew Shepard's case. Right. You saw people who worked to discredit Matthew and tried to make him out to be the perpetrator for being utterly just dehumanized. And the horrible things that happened to Matthew, that poor soul, again, tied up to a post, pistol whipped, and left to die in the freezing cold. It's horrifying. And they're like, oh, he came on to whoever. Let's even take that at face value. Just one of my other bills that we passed to ban the gay trans panic defense, by the way. Take that at face value. And you're saying that an oral solicitation in and of itself is going to be an act of violence, and oral solicitation is verbal. That's just the most ridiculous thing, that you get to kill someone because of this. And yet, even in Virginia, because it was signed in March of 2021, but didn't go into effect until July 1st, murder that happened in the meantime after that, the guy got off completely. And they weren't even allowed to use that defense in court by the judge's ruling, although I personally vehemently disagreed with that. Absolutely, it falls into the category of the rules of evidence, or the laws of evidence, where basically it's what's on the code at the time of the trial, as opposed to necessarily in terms of what's being presented in court. That's a whole different area. That's the thing that is definitely going to leave a very bad taste for a long time.
What's next for you? I live in Connecticut, and Kristin, of course, lives in Virginia. Can you run for the House of Delegates and the Senate at the same time?
No, I am just running for the state Senate in 2023. So I'm running for the 30th district of the Virginia State Senate, which includes the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park and the western part of Prince William County. I will stay in office in the House of Delegates through the end of my third term. At the same time, I will be campaigning for the state Senate while I am still a delegate, which I have already begun doing, although election day isn't until November of 2023.
So we're a year plus out. So
yes,
you're
and at the same
not
time, I'm
facing
running
election.
for one of the two most competitive seats in the state. So this is going to be a multi-million-dollar affair for an $18,000 job.
I'm not sure the math works.
That's what it will be. That's what it will be.
Wow.
We are thrilled that you've been able to take the time to talk to us today, and we love the cold case database. It is very important to both of us, and if there's anything that we can do outside of the work on the podcast to help you with this database or anything going forward, we really hope you'll let us know. This is very important to both of us.
In the meantime, spread the word, and having me on today is part of doing that, so I'm grateful for both of y'all. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, Bill, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.